Good evening, everyone. Brill, and I'm happy to be back after a few months of inactivity. But we have a great show for you tonight. Great guest coming straight out of wherever he came from the East Coast, but actually from California. Citizen soldier, a veteran of the Iraq War, and professional advisor and father of 3 kids.
Well, I wouldn't call them kids anymore. My oldest is 22, and the other 2 are 16. So,
and author of the Little Book on Briefing, a briefing book for leaders and future business people. And today we'll be discussing his new book called Ramadi, which talks about the inner workings of what you've done there and how analysis and intelligence developed while you were there. Our guest, Hamid Chaudhry. How you doing, Chaudhry?
good.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
Okay. On another episode of A Couple Simple Guys.
Convicted by the Holy Spirit.
Your words. This is the neighborhood, and you are not welcome.
That's why I need to be here.
Guess who's back? Still doing that shit, Andre?
What got you? What brought you here? Why have you done what you've done as an analyst? Why did you choose that path? There.
Well, I kind of fell into it originally, and my original plans were to go to college and maybe get into business. But in 2000, I decided, I grew up around a base it was a Marine Corps base down in El Toro, California. I wasn't enjoying college very much, so I decided to go ahead and talk to a recruiter, and it's been an adventure ever since.
So, choose a profession, or did it choose you?
I'd say it chose me. And
Join the Marine Corps.
19 years old.
19. So right.
Yeah, about a couple years after high school. I graduated when I was 17, so I had about 2 years of life experience and struggling in college and working jobs. And I decided that the military was good to go. Now, at the time, I will say this, that was 1999, 2000. So 2000 is when I actually enlisted into the Marine Corps. So times weren't the same, as they are now. And this is prior to 9/11. So I'm not a good gambler, clearly, but at the time when I joined, I thought things for the most part were going to be do your 4 years, get college, get some experience, and at least get the GI Bill. And my first duty station was in Japan when 9/11 took place. And so the whole world flipped upside down. And again, it chose me in that sense because once I was in and once things started to get real, that's when I started to understand the gravity of the situation I'd gotten myself into. And so from then on, it's been a love affair between being an analyst and myself.
Mm-hmm. So you came in early 2000 before the war, and then all of a sudden the war happened. Where were you when 9/11 happened, and what happened there? And I know you talked briefly about it in your new book, but can you give us some background information on?
Absolutely. So I was in Okinawa, Japan. I was with 3rd Marine Division as an analyst in the 2 section, or the intel section. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, we started to hear pounding on the doors. And as you know, you're familiar with, sometimes they do health and welfare checks. So they'll go through your room. So, of course, the assumption was by everybody that they were doing one of those health and welfare checks. And so I wake up, try to think, okay, well, do I have any alcohol? Do I have anything in here that they're going to take as contraband? And so, no, they knocked on the door. I was good and opened the door, and they said, go to the rec room right now. And so everybody went there. And so about 3 o'clock in the morning, walking down the hallway and into the rec room, and I see just a bunch of Marines, some looking shocked, some looking, as if they've been crying. And I look at the TV and I see before the second plane hit. So I see a building is on fire, and I'm thinking, what movie is this? And so it wasn't a movie. It was 9/11. It was what was happening in New York at the time. And so the feeling at that time was this is, clearly an attack on America. And, thousands of people lost their lives that day. And I saw it all unfold live while deployed as a Marine, in Japan. And at that time, we weren't exactly sure right away, who it was. But the feeling was, okay, we're at war. This is what we've trained for. And now it's time to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And how long did it take to go from there to somewhere?
So for me,
For you,
in particular, after Okinawa, I was there in 2000 to 2001, September to September. And it was another 2 years before we got deployed to Iraq. And so I was part of the invasion force with 5th Marines under Colonel Dunford at the time, who we now know as Joseph Dunford, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And so he was my commander rolling into Iraq. So we stayed there in Kuwait until we breached the berm and went into Iraq. So about 2 years after 9/11 took place, under 2 years, that we wound up actually going into Iraq.
And then when you were in Iraq for the first time, you didn't write about that experience. That was just, how would you describe that experience, and how long did that take before you were done with that one?
Surreal. That's how I would characterize it. So you spend a lot of time training, in the military, as you know, and they do a good job. They do a good job of training you. So they say that combat and warfare is about 90%, boredom, and then 10% excitement, and that's pretty accurate. And so as we went through,
In that battle?
even in the battles that took place during that time. And so we were part of the lead trace of elements that were going into Iraq and racing all the way up to Baghdad. And so there was times when it was exciting, breaching through the berm, going through the oil fields, and going through minefields, going through burning oil pumping stations, and then it was boredom all the way up until we got to the cities. Then once we got to the cities, excitement again, and we started to see people coming out cheering us on. And then, of course, we got attacked a lot as well. And the reason why I didn't write about that this time is because I'm kind of saving that and compiling together stories so that way I can write about it. And Ramadi, although it happened 2 years later, definitely is a story that I had a lot more information for. So I decided to put it in a book.
Okay, sounds good. So going to your book, in the beginning, I'm going to go directly from the book. God punishes the weak and the fearful. You learned that at a young age.
I did. And so growing up, and I think every young person learns this at some point, is that there is good and evil. And, whether you believe in God or not, there is some type of power that punishes those who are unable to act. And so, we all learn through bullies, typically, that bad people are going to do bad things. And if you don't act, then you will continue to be bullied. And so in the story, I write about an experience that I had as a kid where I did not stand up to a bully. And I was basically the victim of bullying for pretty much my entire experience in that school.
Or is that middle school?
That was grade school.
Grade school.
So I learned at a pretty young age. Yeah, and I absolutely believe that that's true. And I think that type of idea is reflected in a lot of other things as well.
Mm-hmm. And later on in the book, you wrote, "The experience changed the way I look at my world. I understand that truth and justice is a matter of perspective. Peter taught me a valuable lesson about the people and the world around me. I wish I could thank him and then punch him in the face."
Yeah, Peter. So Peter was the bully. Yeah. And so that lesson that he taught me, although painful, was that if you don't act and if you don't stand up for yourself, you will continue to be punished. And you deserve it. Deserve it.
So all at once, the world became slightly a little bit different for a brown man. Going back to the book, no matter, I would change with the times.
That's true. And so there's a lot of painful lessons that are learned in life, and you have to change. If you don't, you will get old, you will get irrelevant, and you will die.
So you talked about your experience as a Marine, and that there are little things that you learn, but you take with you all the time, and that no one can take those things away from you. Going to war for the second time in Ramadi, what do you think? What type of person were you when you went there before it changed you, or did it change you? Did it have any effect on your who you are now today?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that during the invasion, it was a lot. Some of the most horrific sights that I've ever seen, and some of the, at the same time, most beautiful things that I've ever seen took place during the invasion. And in Ramadi, it was more of just sticking around a certain place, trying to establish some type of stability. And so when you do those types of operations, you get to learn about people and you learn about cultures a lot more than you would as an invasion force rolling through an area with an objective in mind. And so the experiences that I gained in Ramadi taught me a lot about kind of how to understand human nature beyond culture. And so there's some things that are common amongst all men and women and children, no matter where you go. You know, there are a lot of fathers and family men are looking out for their families, mothers looking out for their kids, and kids looking out for themselves often. And so, but when you introduce different cultures and different norms and different things that are just done in different lands, if you will, some of it seems alien, but you can kind of see the logic behind it. You can see, why these things take place, and you have to find this commonality in order to bring about some form of stability for a people. And so Ramadi, in the book, you can read about the exciting stuff that happened there, but there was a lot of interaction with people, and for that, it was very gritty. And oftentimes, you're seeing people that die that you met maybe a week ago. And so some of those things, absolutely. If I could take my brain and show my family the things that I've seen, one, they'd probably be shocked about some of it. But at the same time, there's a lot of lessons there that I will always keep with me and that are relevant even in this country.
So what I'm getting from what you're saying is that even the people that are there, the kids and the families and the normal civilians, you can relate them to the civilians or people that live here. And if we were in a state of war, would we be reacting the same way, potentially, just in a little bit of a different culture as they do?
Yes, I absolutely believe so. I think that, again, culture in our country, at least, is driven by kind of the affluence that we have. It's driven by what's available to us. And same thing with other countries and cultures as well. Whatever is available kind of helps drive that culture. So some people place importance on things like, a village or a tribe, because those things have survived and those things have provided something for those people. In America, absolutely. If we get rid of all this, we get rid of, reliable electricity, excuse me. If we get rid of all these things that we have, phones, all of that, our culture will change as well. And you'll start to see some commonality in these places where they don't have what we have.
And what takes us there? Besides terrorism, obviously, but I mean, Ramadi in Iraq, how we got there or whatever is not really important, but that's the attack in 2000 and on 9/11 led to that. But what brings us to those places that are destabilized? It's not the people.
No, it's the as they call it, the machine, right? As long as the machine is running, then we're good. But as soon as the machine breaks down, then, we're in trouble. And so the things that you rely on a daily basis, when they start to go away, you start to find new things to rely on that help you survive. And so survival essentially drives all of it. That's the reason for a lot of things. It's a reason why, we have houses and we have cars and all of that, because we have different ways of surviving now that go beyond scraping, the dirt and trying to grow, food out of it. You've got now ways of making money that depend on all this stuff. And so survival is what drives it. That's what gets us there. When we start to get more towards that basic understanding of survival, and it depends on what we have available to us. But yeah, an invasion would probably lead us there. We have very fragile systems, like electricity systems. We have fragile, communication systems. How many times have you heard about sun rays coming out and disabling every piece of electronics that we have?
Or just the example right now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Just 3 days ago, everything was completely normal and everybody was fine, and now it's chaos.
Yeah. And we've seen it, by the way. We've seen it with hurricanes. We've seen it with other natural disasters. Things go to chaos. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but in New York, when they had I think it was the hurricane that took place, and it traveled up the coast, but it got back to a primitive type of life in New York, south of New York, where
Hurricane Sandy.
Sandy, yeah. And so Sandy shut down the power in a lot of places, and there were people that were reporting about all types of horrific things that were happening. And
did you ever know why they named it Sandy?
I think they named it Sandy because it's alphabetical. And so whoever does name it, it kind of goes through. So, I'm horrible at math and my alphabet, but whatever, letters preceded S, there's that many hurricanes prior.
Okay. I always thought it was just like they brought in a lot of sand. So the sand's all over New York. That's what they call it Sandy, but that's West Coast right here.
Yeah, absolutely. So they had bonfires, and if women and children knew that you stayed close to the bonfire in during that time, because if you didn't, something bad was going to happen to you.
No. So going back to your book, you described your second time in Kuwait as being very boring, but in great detail. Like you described it as a tent environment, with a lot of things that Marines do, waiting for the inevitable. Can you give us a little bit of feel of how that is, the anticipation? And I'm sure other war fighters and people that have experience that know what that is, but give us a little insight on that.
So it's a lot of anxiety. You're going somewhere, you're going to do something. You're trained to go do that. And waiting is, it's killer. You have to find ways of occupying your time. And, where they have military folks waiting to deploy and to actually go into country and operate, it's never a place with a lot of stuff to do, right? So Marines in Kuwait at that time, we would listen to music and we'd smoke cigarettes and we'd talk. We'd bullshit with each other.
And how long did you have to wait in this like holding area or pattern before you went into the shit?
We probably waited about maybe 4 or 5 days. And so time kind of blended together. And, I mentioned that it's kind of like purgatory, because you're going somewhere and you're ready to go and you want to get there. Yeah. Traveling, in that way, I kind of still feel those types of feelings whenever I travel. I just want to get there and do what it is that I came to do.
And when you were there, you were with a fellow Marine that was doing the same job as you were doing. And you guys became friends, but then you split up when you were actually operating or doing what you were doing in Ramadi. Did you ever see him again after that?
Yeah, we saw each other a couple times. So there would sometimes be attacks that took place that would kind of fall right on the border between our two infantry companies that we were attached to. And so in the story, actually, I kind of left it out of the story, but there was a couple times when there were some deaths that took place of locals that we had to investigate and try to figure out, okay, well, who was this person? Were they really a bad guy? And it was kind of like being a battlefield detective, but now you've got jurisdiction, from my friend in his jurisdiction and my jurisdiction met up. And so now we've got to figure out, okay, well, do you know this guy? No. Okay, I don't know this guy. And try to figure those types of things out.
So did you guys meet up like physically, or did you meet up like digitally?
Physically for that specific example, but then at the time, digital was over a radio.
Oh, okay.
Right. So
wow, completely different concept than like smartphones or laptops or anything like that.
Yeah, and it was, having a conversation. So it's like a tennis match.
Yeah.
You say something and then you wait for the other person to talk. And so you just go back and forth. And for the most part, discussing it over radios, it's got to be professional. But there were a couple instances when I had to go down to his location. And so I would patrol out, get dropped off, and then try to catch a patrol back to my part of town.
Mm.
And so, it was good to have a friend there. And we've remained friends ever since then. I still talk to him. But especially in a combat zone where, people are dying. Your friends that that you make at the unit you're attached to, they're dying as well. But to have that stability and then to be doing the same job it was kind of like a retreat. You were able to have that fellowship with somebody who was doing the same, thing you were, and kind of understood the stresses and the pressures that you were in. And so that was a relief at times to sit down and talk with him personally.
Yeah. So get your shit and get off the plane. Someone yelled in a gruff and loud voice. It woke me up in a panic. I don't even remember. I fell asleep. So That's straight out of the book. You're on a plane. You're out of Kuwait. You end up in Ramadi. How would you describe that experience? First, what year is this?
2005.
2005. Okay.
Yeah.
And then is this like what part of the year? And how describe that experience for people that were never there?
So it was early spring, and at the time we were kind of at a midpoint where it was a little chilly, but it was getting warm. And so everything that you did in Ramadi was, it was a sweaty experience. And so you add on to that, this momentum that had built on the lead up to go to Ramadi. The flight, everything was just pushing you. It was like gravity was pulling you in that direction, and you were compelled to go. And so your heart's racing, being woken up, running on little sleep, and they're not very kind in the military, as you know. And so you've got places to be, and you can't stand around waiting to get attacked. And so it was a constant rush. And again, you're excited to get to where you need to be, but not excited in a good way. More excited so you get some sort of relief because you're in a static position for at least a couple days.
So when you got to the airfield, how long did it take take you to get to your base?
It took us, we landed in Al Assad. And so that was pretty close to Ramadi. And so it took about maybe an hour and a half. And so we had to convoy over. We had to load up into trucks. So from the airplane to the convoy showing up and loading onto the trucks, that was probably about maybe 30 to 20 minutes. And so, you've got everything you need for about 7 months in your hands and on your back. And so you've got to, power walk with all that gear. I would say easily about maybe 80 to 90 pounds of just stuff that you have. And then it's eat when you can and then wait for the convoy. And then it was about an hour truck ride on convoy to get from Al Assad to Ramadi.
And then in Ramadi, how many bases were there?
So at the time we had Hurricane Point, which was on the tip of Ramadi, on the northwestern tip, across the old canal. So on the west side of Ramadi, there was a canal that was man-made. On the north side was the Euphrates. And so on the other side of the old canal, to the west of Hurricane Point, was Camp Ramadi, which was an army base where I was. Headquarters was at Hurricane Point, and then south of Hurricane Point was Snake Pit, which is where Charlie Company was, where my friend Steve was located. And then there was another location downtown at the government center where Alpha Company rotated.
Okay, and then where was Jocko? located at the time?
He was across, more likely he was across the Euphrates at Camp Sharkey. So that's where all the SEALs were.
Okay. So he was there at the same time that you were?
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
If he was in Ramadi in 2005, when a lot of stuff was going on, he was probably there.
Okay. When you described the guys that picked you up, and I'm going to go straight from the book, I'm not sure how else to explain it, but they looked dangerous. Like they had departed from the civilized world a long time ago. They had a grim humor, and each one of them wore an evil smirk. They looked at us like we were a meal. They all had a smile on their face. Maybe it was a relief that they made it through another mission.
Yeah, so now I've been in the invasion. So I considered myself at that point, okay, you're a combat vet. You pulled the trigger, you've been shot at, as well as other things, RPG, all types of stuff. But these guys, different in Ramadi. Day after day, these guys are going on convoys. And so when we saw these guys, they were straight out of like a Western, right? Covered in dust. They looked wild. And, they're roaming around the roadways, facing IEDs, facing attacks. And they knew what we were in for, and so they saw a lot of young faces. And you could tell that, they were joking, having a good time. It's kind of like your first day in prison, I assume. Never been to prison, but where they know what's in store for you. And they know that you need to toughen up quick. And so, yeah, it was a little frightening to see that when you're young.
You talked about you talked a little bit about in your book about how when you were in the Marine Corps before all the war started and how everything was normal and everything was fine, and then you started noticing people coming back with injuries, specifically injuries from IEDs and atrocious injuries that you started to see around base. Did those type of things were those things in your mind when you were convoying out to Ramadi, or when you were in Ramadi? Did that ever cross your mind that it could happen to you?
Absolutely. And so, the thing is, when you start to see your own people wounded, you start to, sober up really quickly. That there is, this idea of heroicism that maybe is not as important as survival. And so, as we're riding these convoys at that time, we didn't have a lot of armor. And so we had maybe 1/4-inch thick steel plating on the side of these vehicles. But IEDs were still pretty powerful back then. And so you think about, am I going to lose a hand? Am I going to get killed? Am I going to lose my head? And when you see people coming back with those wounds, it becomes real. If you see somebody on TV or in a video, it's different because it's so separated from you. But when you start to see those people and talk to them and ask them questions, that's when you start to realize the gravity of the situation.
So with that fear, as you're in the situation, how do you handle that?
Well, as much as you can, you try to break that cycle of thought, right? So you try to avoid thinking about the things that you can't control. And so I know that, especially my first time in Iraq, there's a sense of relief when you're able to unfreeze and start to actually do productive things in combat. When you start pulling the trigger, when you start, maneuvering in some cases. So as you go through, you scan and you look and you try to be as proactive as possible. And so those things you find comfort in. And then, of course, there's also the superstition that seems to pop up sometimes. And so, I smoke a cigarette before I go on a convoy because I haven't, been attacked every time I smoke a cigarette, as well as other things. You pray, you do whatever you can. But in some cases, you pretty much just have to sit, wait, and just hope that nothing happens.
In those moments where you're moving or you're doing something else, does the fear fade, or is it always there?
The fear fades, I'd say, and sometimes it can feel kind of good, right? Because chemically what's happening is that you get a rush of adrenaline, and immediately it starts to, mess with your heart, your hearing, your sight, and everything. And if you can get comfortable in those uncomfortable moments, then it starts to feel warm. And so you start to feel almost like a sense of power.
Alexa, turn off. Man, I had a good question too. Shit. Well, I'm gonna ask it one more time. Namaste. Okay, but when you're feeling that warmness or whatever, you're no longer afraid.
Yeah.
Like because you're operating or whatever. What happens when you start seeing the atrocities that are like happening around you, like somebody gets shot or somebody gets killed? Does that bring you back to the fear?
It definitely has a tendency to do that because now we're talking about survival. And I personally have maybe not acted as heroically as I would have wanted to, but there comes a certain point where you have to make a decision. Now, in the case of, let's say, you have an injured buddy, you have to make that choice. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what that choice is. I've seen people make it, and I don't want to say thankfully, but fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, I've never had to make that decision where I've absolutely risked my life to help someone else. Usually, things have kind of worked out where it hasn't been that type of situation, but you definitely feel a fear when you start to see things happen that almost seemingly just happen out of nowhere, right? So people getting shot at. You think that maybe you'd be able to understand where the shots are coming from. Most of the time you don't, especially during that time. And so the first thing you think is, how do I get further behind this cover? Where do I go? Do I shoot back? All these thoughts sort of race through your head, or sometimes they don't. But, if you act, you're able to kind of fight that and move back into that productive type of kind of mindset. And that's why training is so important, because if you learn to do things without thinking, then those things start to move you in that productive direction. But, of course, the fear is always there. I've yet to have ever gotten shot at and thought,
Just, whatever. Yeah, that's really interesting. And not only did you have to get shot at and shoot back, but you also had that extra responsibility of figuring out why it was happening, where it was coming from, and identifying that for the people you were with.
Yeah.
So that's a little different.
Well, and there was an added element of knowledge there that the others didn't have, right? So, you're aware of threats that exist before anybody else knows. And so in the story, and this is based off of a lot of, true stories. Now, of course, I took a little artistic license to make it a story, to make it good, and to kind of protect some reputations and also protect some people. But you learn about things. And so we had an issue with a sniper in the city. And I knew about it before anybody else really understood what was going on. And so walking the streets for me was a little bit different when I patrolled with the unit, because I was aware that there was something going on there. That was a danger, but of course you don't want to spread fear until you know what's actually going on. And so that knowledge of what's taking place sometimes can work against you, because you know what's actually being risked sometimes.
It's tough, but that's some tough that you had to live through, and we're thankful for it. So we're gonna take a. So Hamed, you're in Ramadi. It's 2005. It's a different experience for you, and now you're at the base. If you just got there, and the first experience you talked about in your book, when the base gets hit as you're there. And you already met the people at the base. Was it a base or was it an outpost?
It was an outpost.
Mm-hmm.
It was an estate that belonged to somebody wealthy. I don't know if it was Saddam's property but it was somebody that owned a property on the very tip of Ramadi. And essentially we had reinforced it and we built up walls around it so that way we could operate out of there. So it was where our headquarters was.
Mm-hmm. And in the book, so you talk about that experience, and I'm going to go straight to it. A Marine gets hit on a viewpoint or an observation point right above the facility, and the radio call goes over the radio. Cock, shrapnel to the leg, requesting medevac. The panic was evident in the tin voice that came from the radio speaker. The colonel tensed his jaw, pressed the button on the handset, and calmly said, "Marine, we are not going to walk anyone into an ambush. Get on your weapon and do your job." The bridge post responded, "Roger." Silence. The silence was once again broken by the sound of 7.62 millimeter rounds from an enemy AK-47. Then I heard something beautiful. It was an MG-40 medium machine gun firing from our own roof. The Marine on the radio was engaging the enemy that wanted to kill him and his friends. He was fighting for his life. Someone quietly said, "Fuck yeah," because the first test has been passed.
So a little bit of background on that. And so COC, Command Operations Center, right? Not cock, but that's the way it's spelled. But yeah, so when we first got there, it's no secret to anybody in town. You have a sudden influx of, about 300 more Marines, and the enemy knows what's going on. They're watching and they're waiting. And so the first thing that happened, first couple days, was that they would probe us. They would probe us with attacks, shoot a AK-47 roughly about maybe 200 meters away, and then they would move back another 100 meters the next day, and they would see how far we could range, how far we could see. And so at that time, the AK-47 was preceded by a homemade rocket. So these guys got so good with these homemade rockets that they would actually be able to set up a stand and actually use trigonometry to figure out where this thing is going to land. And this thing landed on a rooftop observation post. And so it's sandbags piled up around a wooden frame with sandbags on top. And so there was 2 Marines that night, and this is true story that happened. And a rocket landed, and then these guys got shot at. And of course, we're downstairs, and we hear all this stuff. And we hear, the knock inside the building. It sounded like somebody was just knocking on wood, but it was AK-47 firing on the Marine. And the first thing that Marine did, because we were all new there, is he thought to himself, "Oh my God, my buddy's hurt. I need to get him out of here." So the first thing he did was request a medevac. That's not your job when you're in combat. Your job is to basically return fire until it's safe. And so the colonel got woken up, because this is the first sort of like real contact that took place, and walked in with his flip-flops on, and probably right out of bed with his military issued silky shorts and t-shirt, and he got onto the radio and told him, "There's no medevac going on right now. It's not safe, and you need to get on that 240 Gulf and start firing back." And so whatever the colonel said to him, it snapped him right out of it. And so he said, "Roger." And then he started firing back. And that first test, had been passed. And so now we took an injury, but that Marine, reacted beautifully after he was corrected and fired back. And once it was safe, we were able to medevac that Marine out there.
You described him as considered walking wounded, and other that terminology has been passed down in military history. The walking wounded. What does that mean, and what did that mean in Ramadi at this time?
It meant that he did not require an ambulance, and ambulance is anything that transport a casualty. And so he was able to continue on and stay at the unit. So he had a wound that he was able to recover from, and he continued to fight, which, as maybe messed up as it is to say, the more combat veterans we have, the more we have individuals that are used to passing that test, as I put it, the better off the unit is, because you have more capable fighters.
And now that we're out of the war, even the world's at war, but we're out of it for who knows how long. And there's always war fighters going on there. But how long do you think, how important it is for veterans to pass that down to the next soldier? And how likely are they to experience that and retain that information?
Well, as I'm getting up there in age, I saw going from a transition to dealing with, senior Marines that the last time that they were in combat was either in Somalia or it was in maybe even Grenada, depending on, how old the NCO or the officer was. The tradition of passing down knowledge about combat is probably one of the most important things that you can get from your older people, right? Especially when it comes to the warrior class, because you train for combat, you train to fight. One of the most important things we do in peacetime is to train. And so that knowledge is indispensable. I mean, to understand what it is to get into a situation where it's high stress and again, survival being your number one, trait at that moment, be able to act and do your job. Because if you freeze and you don't fight back, as I mentioned in the very beginning, of the book itself, then you become the victim and you will continually become the victim. And so when you're facing people that want to kill you, they're not going to stop if you give up in some cases. And so that knowledge, if we lose it, we start to get a softer force and we start to believe in things that aren't realistic, which is that, as soon as you throw your hands up and you give up, that the badness will stop. And so it's important to retain, that type of knowledge, or at least to capture, which is one of the reasons why I wrote this book.
Mm. And so when the next situation that you described in the book was a situation where your commander, he was killed. And it started from a bit of information that had started on the ground, and we're going to break down to kind of the analysis of it a little bit, but let's just go right into it. So you guys were on a patrol, you went into a market, and there was an old man there that identified something out of abnormal that then led your commander to engage in a mission to identify that threat. Mm-hmm. So let's go into that. And from the moment of where you identified him, I know in the book you went back to the base, and then you had a debriefing, and then you went back out again to re-engage the old man. Let's go to where you re-engaged him and what happened when you arrived on scene and what was going on in the situation, what was going on in your mind, and what you were trying to identify at that time.
So at the time, we thought it was a wild goose chase. And the details of the book were written in a way that kind of tells a story without giving up the details. It's based off of a real event, and in order to protect certain individuals, as well as tell the story to kind of get the lesson out of it, some of those details have been changed. And so when we found the old man, when the old man was found, at least, we kind of thought that this was nothing. This is a waste of time. And but we went back out. And so we found the old man, and he was doing the same type of stuff he was before, which was kind of pointing at a Marine's piece of equipment and then pointing in a direction. And so, we got there, but we thought it was a wild goose chase.
So this old man, this Iraqi, was he trying to help our forces, or was he trying to set us up?
We have no idea.
What did it seem like to you at the time?
Well, at the time, it seemed as if he was just a crazy old man. We weren't sure what he was pointing at even, but later on we realized, because of what we found, that he was pointing at the piece of equipment. And so we didn't know who he was. He didn't say anything more than, in fact, he didn't say anything. He just pointed and pointed. and that was it. But yeah, we had no idea if he was trying to help us or hurt us, but we knew that going back to the same place was probably a bad idea.
Mm. And so you went back to the same place with your commander, and the old man pointed at a facility or a house that was had the front door welded shut.
Yes.
And you eventually identified that what he was pointing at was a sniper location.
Yeah, and he was pointing at a radio. It was a piece of equipment that we would wear, which was an inter squad radio. And the house that in the story where they went to, they found the piece of equipment, and so
which then led to the captain's death.
Yeah, the captain was shot by the sniper, and so what we could assess was that this guy who was a sniper, that he was listening into our patrols. And so those radios had kind of a limited range because there were inter-squad communications. And so whenever a patrol was nearby, all of a sudden this thing would activate.
How did he get that radio, do you think?
Well, the assumption is that a couple units before us, there was a sniper team that was, they were uncovered. They were, I forgot what the word for it is, but there's an actual military term for it.
Discovered or compromised?
Compromised, that's the word. So they were compromised and annihilated. And by an individual by the name of, not classified or anything, but his name was Mohammed Daham. And so there was equipment. The Marines got killed and the equipment got passed out in Iraq. And so we assessed that radio came from that team, that was sniper team that was compromised.
Mm. And so when the commander took a squad to the house to investigate, and you took position on a left side of the road or on the side of the road, and you looked back into the man as as the radio signal started coming back and said, "Chaudhry, come to the house. It's clear. We found a radio." And as you got that call, chaos started happening. If people started firing, and you looked back at the old man down the street, and you described it in the book. The old man watching down the street at the house, his face busted open in the same way that a tube of biscuit dough does. His eyes looked in two different directions, and his head bobbled as he fell. It sounded like a loud foamy crack. A light pink mist of blood still saturated the air momentarily, and then dissipated after he was down. He laid on the ground as blood poured out of his open skull and nostrils.
Yeah, well, so now, as the story is written, in reality, the old man, we never found him, and that's the real details of it. But in the book, yes, absolutely.
Did you feel that he was responsible for your commander's death?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And later on, you described the gun truck near the house shot several rounds toward the north. The squad came running out of the gate and loaded a body into the Humvee, and it was the captain. The lieutenant and the squad came running back to the patrol and yelled for everyone to load up. The Humvee raced back to the intersection near the rest of the patrol and did a 3-point turn to face the house that it just came from. In this situation, my job was not tactical leadership. It was intelligence. I had to ensure not to interfere with what the lieutenant had to do. I would have a chance to ask questions later. I was mainly freaked out, and everything happened so fast. I heard the lieutenant report the casualty over the main radio. "The captain is dead." "Oh my God," I said. "It hit me like a train. The captain is dead." "What the fuck? The captain is dead."
So at that point, yes, my job was not to interfere. I was an attachment to an infantry company, and so, at that time, I had to capture as many details as possible because there would have to be a reckoning that took place after. And so I knew that, I was hoping we'd find the guy at the time. But I also knew that if I didn't capture the details, if I didn't write down like as many notes as possible, that all that information is lost because, memory degrades pretty rapidly. And when you're in situations like that, there's also a lot of confusion. So the Marines that I would have to then go back and ask about what their experiences were, it would be a little skewed, and sometimes it's skewed because of either they're trying to hide something or, they are just incorrect about what they heard and just assumed it was something else. And so, yeah, I wasn't there, as a trigger puller at that time. But I was there as basically just an intel guy. And now we've got a situation that we were not expecting at all. And so, yeah, my job was to get out of the way and just kind of go along for the ride. But when the captain got shot, it was very shocking because he was the first casualty. And so for our company, at least. And then it became, this is real. And so the lieutenant came back and acted, did what he was supposed to do. But when somebody comes running at you and says, by the way, somebody just got shot, load up on the vehicles, you don't have a second to process that. You've just got to move. And it was important that I let, my brothers in the unit basically do what it is that they were supposed to do.
Mm. And from that situation, how many more patrols did it take to eventually catch that sniper?
Well, it took probably about another month. So, numerous patrols, at least for each company, it was probably about 3 patrols a day. And so, yeah, for about a month. So I'd say easily about, 3 times 30.
And then what did you guys have to do to
90 patrols
during those patrols?
Yeah,
you would be raiding houses and looking. How did you, because you were in charge of determining where to look? Mm-hmm. What was your thought process on how to determine where to look, who to look for, and how'd you get that, pick up that information?
So it was my job to try to determine what took place. And essentially what it was an investigation, and we're trying to recreate, and I particularly was trying to recreate everything that took place. And so even down to where everybody was standing. And then based off of, everybody that's there and their experiences compiled into kind of this recreation of the reality that took place at that time. Excuse me. So, we determined where to look based off of where we assessed the shot came from, based off of what everybody kind of witnessed. And so where they heard the shots come from. And then we also had to get the caliber of the round from the captain and determine what type of rifle it came from. And so it gave us a range because, a certain amount of gunpowder, certain type of weapon, you have a certain distance.
And you were the only soldier, well, Marine. Marines aren't soldiers, but you were the only Marine that was charged to investigate this and determine what's going on.
Yes. Well, I primarily took it on myself, right? And I was the guy on the ground there at the time and when it took place. And so with the sniper that was there with us and again, the Marines that were there, everybody has kind of an experience of the way weapons work and the way that the tactics that were employed by our enemy at that time. But yes, it was me compiling the reports together onto, at that time, a PowerPoint that recreated everything that took place. And so my report was primarily, here's everything that I know that happened, and then here's where I assess the shot took place from.
Mm-hmm. And you finally got the guy. Did you actually, when you came into that, his home, I assume is his home on the raid that took him out, did you get to look him in the face?
I wish. It was another company's area. And so we were on the border of another company's area, which was, again, I mean, I would have loved to be a part of that raid. unfortunately, the way things happen is that you kind of just things happen. You're not there for them all the time, but obviously the information that I provided helped identify the individual so that way we could turn them over to the authorities, which, believe it or not, there were authorities in Iraq that would handle a lot of the legal issues. And so he went away. But no, I never got the satisfaction of saying, I got you, because I was busy in another AO while the other company, which was Alpha Company, was able to capture him.
Yeah. Okay. That's intense, but all a job that needed to be done, and it sounds like a great experience. And you go into a lot of detail in your book about your experiences in Ramadi, that specific sniper experience with your commander, and what lessons learned that you got out of it. And if when can we expect you for this to be released for others to read?
So I have currently, again, this is a work in progress. My expectation is by July, the manuscript will be complete in its form to submit to a publisher. And so when you're in the military and you write a book, you have to go through certain checks, and the military has to read every word of that book. And that, I've heard, takes up to a year. So I guess the release would be maybe around July of next year.
Okay, cool. That you got it here, folks. July of next year, Ramadi will be ready for your consumption. We're gonna have to decompress a little bit. We're on a serious topic, serious note. So let's go back. I have a question from Twitter that wanted to ask you: if cars drive and planes fly, what does a rocket do?
It soars.
It soars.
Yeah.
Okay. Soars. All right. I've never heard a rocket soar. Is that official?
No, I wouldn't say it's official. It's subjective.
Subjective. Okay, perfect. All right. Now let's pivot a little bit. So it's Saturday. The Russian government invaded Ukraine.
Yep.
About 3 days ago. Right now, they are attacking the city of Kyiv, and they are attempting to take over. First of all, what do you, from your experiences in basically coin operations, and now this like big government near peer experience that's happening right now? What do you think about this whole invasion of Russia and Ukraine? What would you think about it before it happened, and now that it's happening now?
I, honest to God, did not think that he would go through with it. We've had decades upon decades of threats being made, of exercises on borders, and the commitment that it takes, and the commitment of an entire country to now invade another country, as we know, in America, what's involved. But the economic impacts, the social impacts, the political impacts around the world, geopolitical, I never thought that he would have gone through with it. And then on top of that,
You mean Vladimir Putin?
Yes,
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin. To me, it's still trying to figure out his end game, because he's galvanized NATO. He's struck a fear in all European nations. And so, the question is what comes next? Does he get himself involved in a insurgency? That's inevitably going to happen. And there's going to be people that fight back against this invasion, this potential occupation, depending on if he pulls back, if there's a government that's put in place that's more amenable to Russian policies.
So you think Ukraine will fall?
I think it will. I think Ukraine will fall. I think that there is too much power in the Russian army that they're essentially, you're going to see a lot of martyrs and you're going to see a lot of propaganda. I don't see Russia being stopped in Ukraine.
Do you think that it was worth the reasons behind why Vladimir Putin did it or not? Do you think he has support from his government? He must have support from his government to do it. Not just I'm sure it's not just his own choice, but by garnering support, is there a perception of the world that we perhaps weren't seeing before that is a little more real now that this invasion has occurred?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to Russia's concern about NATO and the history that Russia has, especially with the collapse of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, I think that their concerns are being taken a lot more seriously, and that when Vladimir Putin says, or at least he threatens something, he will follow through with it. I think that is now, this is sort of a new era that we're going into, because we've had aside from the global war on terrorism, we've had relative peace when it came to the major nations, like the big boys on the block. But now, all bets are off. And so the big question now is, what's China going to do? And where is Russia going to stop?
Very interesting questions. And we'll discuss them more on a next episode of A Couple Simple Guys. But for now, thank you for joining me.
It's been a pleasure
coming out and chit-chatting. I really enjoyed your book, just reading through the first 9 chapters. It was very interesting, very detailed. It was a great experience. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed doing this.
I did.
And if Jocko invites you on his podcast to discuss your book further, please put in a good word.
Well, you did it first. That's what first thing I'll say.
All right. So anyway, anything else you'd like to say to the viewers listening? The last hurrah.
God punishes the weak and those who are unable to act.
Don't be weak. Be strong. Because the world needs you. Good night, everybody.
All right, man.